All right. So we're going to start with meditation after we finish the last two, the animal realm and the hell realm. But before we jump into that, did you want to ask about God, demigod, human, or hungry ghost before we do any more of them? Or interesting ideas you had about parallels from other places of wisdom? Okay, we'll wait for the coffee to kick in. So the animal realm is quite obvious to us because we see the animal realm, isn't it? And the dominant emotion there, negative emotion, is ignorance. And we can see this very easily, can't we? That they, of course, have anger and attachment and pride and all of these things. You can see that just watching your cat all day. But really, ignorance is the driving thing. So they have ignorance about who they are and ignorance about cause and effect, but they also just have the delusion of ignorance, excuse me, pervading everything, right? They don't necessarily understand that development is possible. They don't necessarily understand that altruism is a good idea. They might look after members of their own species, of their own family, or not. But learning isn't something that is very easy for animals. Even if they're, mammals who can learn things, there's just kind of an underlying not knowing how the world works, not knowing cause and effect. And that means it's really easy to generate afflictions, and it's really easy to continue to stay in that kind of a realm or to go lower. So, if we're friends with some animals, then the best thing we can do is to help them not accumulate too much non-virtue. And so to try and discourage them from killing. It's not the worst thing in the world to spay and neuter, to desex your animals. It's actually not a terrible thing for them. It's something that might actually make their afflictions less. So, do with that what you will. But I think most importantly is if you've got pets who are dying, your cat has kidney failure or your dog's legs are starting to hurt. Just because they're suffering doesn't mean that you're ending their suffering by putting them down. It means that you are pushing pause on their suffering, and now it's going to be experienced in future lives. What you're doing is ending your suffering, watching them suffer. Yeah, and so the best thing you can do is to give them pain relief, like maybe some morphine or something like that, and let them die naturally with as little pain as possible so that they can finish the karma of that rebirth, and so that your connection with the animal stays really, really positive, so that when you meet each other in future lives, it's not too complicated. It remains that beautiful connection that you had during this life. It also means that you don't then have the karma of having killed. Of course, the karma of killing your pet out of compassion is a lot less heavy than if you had killed an animal out of anger or out of some other affliction. Killing is a natural misdeed. So that's something to just think about with the animal realm. And of course, if in the past, before you met Buddhism, before you took on the ethics of non-harmfulness, if you put down your animals, you can purify that, and you can do prayers for their sake, whatever realm they're in now, that when you meet again, that it's positive. So don't beat yourself up if you thought you did the right thing way back when. You did the best you could with the information you had, and now we know better. And so we can be a little bit more skillful. So if it's the sort of disease where you wouldn't kill a person, definitely it's not something where you would kill the animal, right? So if your grandmother had kidney disease, you wouldn't kill her, would you? Right? So why are you killing your cat if they have kidney disease? What about eating animals is a question that came up. You're not having the direct karma of killing, but of course you are riding the back of other people who are engaged in killing karma and maintaining industries that are not necessarily ethical. And so if you're not ready to give up meat, you can eat less meat, and you can eat it from more ethical sources where the animals are treated well and where they're put down in a more ethical and kind way. Of course, if you can give up meat, that's great. Some people have health issues, some people have attachment issues, and they're not quite able to do that yet. So then try to have less. right? And if you're an amazing, pure, fallen fruit vegan, don't get too proud, don't get too arrogant. There's a lot of conditions that make you able to live in that way. It's not something that's accessible to everyone. And it also doesn't mean that you're living a life free from harm, because just the growing, harvesting, and transportation of fruit and vegetables involves harm of sentient beings. And so what we look at is that anything we're consuming, whether it's clothes that we're buying, whether it's cars that we're using, whether it's food that we're eating, everything within samsara that we consume involves a little bit of harm of others. And that should make us even more disillusioned with samsara and better about not consuming as much. Yeah. So rather than, beating yourself up or feeling paralyzed, it's just more information about why samsara is unacceptable, because everything we do seems to hurt something. Yeah. If we were a Buddha, we wouldn't be hurting things constantly, just getting through the day. Yeah. So that's the animal talk. Questions about the animal talk? Look, it's a bit confronting and we can feel a bit defensive about our choices, but at the end of the day, if we can just minimize all forms of consumption, that means that our degree of harmfulness within a samsaric environment is less, right? So if we just try and be a little less indulgent about the things we consume, do we need as many clothes as new as often? Do we need as many gadgets as new as often? It's not like you have to give up everything completely and, live like Gandhi with his little hand-woven loincloth and, just eat lentils. It'd be great if we could all do that, but, start where you are and enjoy what you have. Once you have it, you don't have to feel guilty about it. It's too late. You might as well be like, this is soft and nice. I don't need another one though. Yeah, now that this is so soft and nice, why don't I get the same one in 5 different colors? No, right? You've got one, enjoy it, be content, right? So just be really, keep your sense of humor and notice that we're all a little bit absurd with how we justify what we buy, what we eat, what we use, and just gently try and pare it back a little bit and see if we can live a little bit more lightly on the earth. Yeah. So it would be fine for us to live like animals if we were animals. Yeah, because animals are driven by all sorts of disturbing emotions, but living their life, they don't cause as much destruction, do they? If we live like animals, we cause huge destruction. Yeah, if we're always looking for new mates, looking for new housing, looking for food, looking for entertainment, when we're living like animals as human beings, we cause epic destruction. Animals living like animals cause a lot less trouble. So we need to remember that even if it's sort of a natural animal way of living and we let ourselves off the hook by thinking that way, to remember that actually we're human beings. So our capacity for harm and our capacity for help is hugely more, and we need to be a little bit more responsible. Yeah, a little bit more responsible. Just, best you can. See someone's cat walking by. Perfect timing. Right. And feel happy that if you have animals in your life, that you're able to give them a good relationship and some sort of imprints for future lives. That's a really lovely thing to be able to offer another creature, especially one that's in the animal realm and can't study. You can familiarize them with different things that will come in handy later. So if, say, for example, your cat is happy and healthy and walks by images like this all the time while feeling happy and healthy, possibly in future lives, when they see images like this, they'll associate it with joy and be drawn to it and not even know why. And that will come in handy for their spiritual path. Maybe we were that kind of pet. Yeah. Maybe we were a flea on the Buddha's shoulder and it was really comfy there and it felt really safe, and now we like Buddhism. We don't know how these things play out over time. So we can really think differently about the animal relationships we have in our life and see what we can do to bring out their potential and to help prevent their negative karma. And then in our own life, try not to live like an animal. If we get to be a human, live like a human. Yeah. Okay, so then the hell realms is kind of a confronting conversation, but basically you got hot hells and you got cold hells, because those are the two ways that anger manifests. Yeah, so it's born from hatred, and it's the dominant disturbing emotion there is hatred. So the reason you're born in a hell realm is because of your hatred. And when you're in the hell realm, you're surrounded by things that trigger hatred and are a kind of a reflect that state of mind. So you might have anger that is icy, that blocks people out, that is passive aggressive, that is neglectful, that ignores, right? We can have that kind of anger. Or we can have obvious anger, which is fiery and raging and unkind in a kind of attacking, burning way. Both are the wish to harm, right? It's just, freezing anger is slightly more socially acceptable or more culturally relevant in some cultures than others. Fiery, burning, anger is more common or culturally appropriate in other countries or other families, right? So, when I was visiting Sweden, you'd get a lot more of the cold, icy anger. And when I'm visiting Spain, it's a bit more of the fiery, burning anger, but it's not to say they're not both anger. Yeah. And those are broad generalizations, of course, and we each have both kinds, depending on the relationship that we're having anger in response to. So what that does is it creates an environment that is either hot and burning and horrible, or cold and freezing and horrible. Yeah, your mind creates an environment that reflects your state of mind. Just like now, right? Just like now, our mind creates an environment that reflects our state of mind. There's the environment that we've created through our group karma, and then there's our response to it. So you could be in a garden and think it's horrible, it's overgrown, there's insects everywhere, this is hell. Or I'm in a garden, it's overgrown, it's flourishing with life and vitality. There's insect life and butterflies, and look at how vibrant and alive it is. And so you could have two different responses to the same environment as well, right? The same environment could feel like heaven or could feel like hell, depending on your state of mind also, right? But we're talking about like the literal hell realm that you send yourself to because of your angry hatred habits. No one sends you there. It's not punishment. It's natural cause and effect. But within the human realm, we kind of put ourselves into a hellish environment if we're full of hatred. Nothing will satisfy us. Nothing is enough. And everything makes us upset and irritable. So, in this situation that we're in right now, it could be that normally your house is a sanctuary and a place of peace and refuge and recovery. But if you're stuck here all day and you're not allowed to leave your house, it could start to feel like prison, right? Or it could start to make you, bounce off the walls and, I need to get out of here, right? The same house sometimes feels like refuge, sometimes feels like prison. It's just your house, right? And so what's the mind that you're bringing to it that makes it feel either like safety or like prison? It's within our own control, isn't it? So these are just some interesting ideas to explore these 6 realms. You can think about them as literal places, or you can think of them as a metaphor for the human experience. But the main thing is to look at how there's a relationship between how we're seeing the world and our afflictive response to it. And that however we're seeing the world, if it's samsaric, is going to bring out one of the afflictions. Everything within samsara is going to bring out one affliction or another. And so whether things are good, middling, or bad, there's the potential for negative states of mind and harming ourselves and others. That's why we want to be disillusioned with this whole pattern. Does it make sense? Yeah, so take it or leave it, see how you go. But the other teaching within this section is to remember how wonderful it is to be a human being where there is both pleasure and pain, because the pleasure and the resources and the support mean that we can practice, but it's not so much that we get drunk with pleasure. The suffering and the pain and the difficulty remind us of why negative karma is not something we want to continue. It reminds us of the downside of allowing afflictions to drive, and it can wake us up. And so if we had only suffering, like in the hell realm, we wouldn't be able to practice. It's just too hard, right? Just like if you were starving in Yemen right now, unless you had a very, very trained mind before you started starving, it would be hard to be generous, right? But if you're, you know, have a full pantry and a full refrigerator, it's easy to be generous. Yeah. So we're just remembering that at our level, we're in a really fortunate situation where there's struggle and there's safety and support, both. And it's a really vital balance for the spiritual path. And if we want lasting happiness, a little bit of suffering right now can motivate us. Yeah, we don't need to seek it out. We have plenty, or we can remember the past when we had plenty, but thinking of it in these terms. So do you have any questions about the 6 realms? We do a little meditation? Okay, so we're gonna do an analytical meditation where you're basically trying to see your personal this life version of each of these realms so that you can catch it better. Yeah, and if you can catch it, you can transform it. If you don't catch it, then it's just gonna go like autopilot and you have very little choice or control. But if you can catch it, you can transform it. So if you want to just get yourself a straight posture, and if you're on a couch or on a chair, you can stay there, but just make sure that you're not like crumpled backwards or leaning too far forward. Get yourself centered on your chair or your cushion. And then think once again, the purpose of my life is to free all sentient beings from suffering, to bring all sentient beings lasting happiness. In order to do this, I must understand cause and effect. I must train my mind to full enlightenment, and in that way I'll be of greatest benefit to them. Therefore, I'm going to meditate on the 6 realms. And so with that strong motivation, we'll spend a couple of minutes on the breath and then shift to analysis. And just watch the breath. Let the surface distractions settle. Let the busyness of lunch settle. And now think about a time, remember a time when life was very easy and happy and full of pleasure, even if it was just one day or a few weeks. Even if it wasn't totally perfect, just take a minute from your life and remember when things were happy and easy. And then during that time when things were happy and easy, try and think of the two versions of yourself. The version that was open and wanted to share that happiness, that was inclusive of other people, and the version of yourself that wanted to keep and hoard all that happiness, who wanted to prevent others from encroaching on it, or that looked down on other people who didn't know how to be happy or couldn't seem to organize their life. So just try and find those two versions of yourself, the less afflicted version and the more afflicted version, during a time when things were easy. And then bring into that analysis a time when things were good and easy, but you noticed yourself comparing it to the happiness of others. And you noticed that there were some people that seemed to be more happy, more well off. And so when you were comparing your happiness to other people's happiness, sometimes you were just happy for them, and sometimes you were jealous. Why did they get that? They're not better than me. Or they are better than me. That's not fair. But just again, notice when you've had the comparison, when have you responded well with your comparison? And when have you been afflicted with your comparison? Still within the realm of when things were relatively easy, when you were relatively happy. But just shift from God realm to demigod realm within your own human experience. When have you been happy about other people's happiness? When have you been annoyed about other people's happiness? Just identify again those two versions of yourself. Less afflicted, more afflicted. And then moving to the human realm, the metaphoric human realm, when you've been driven by desire and attachment. And just notice, if you were to look at an ordinary day, maybe even today, how many parts of the day seem driven by a craving? I just need to get comfortable and then I will. I just need to be settled, then I will. I just need other people to ... But just within one ordinary day, just try and guess, how often does your mind go back to attachment, desire? Start with when you wake up and scan through the ordinary activities of a normal day. When is there more attachment? When is there less? Are there certain activities that escalate your attachment and certain activities in a normal day which settle and subdue your attachment? Are there any trends or patterns you can find? And then just shift to thinking about the metaphoric animal realm within your own human life. When are those times when ignorance dominates? Is it on a day off with nothing to do? Is it when you're waking up or falling asleep? When are the times when you become vague and spacey? Or completely in your lizard brain, all about desire for relationships, wanting sex, wanting food, wanting more, feeling defensive about your home space, protective of it. But when it becomes very basic, very animal, without much nuance or subtlety, without intelligence or altruism, when do your basic needs turn into something animal that's dysfunctional? It might not be very often, or it might be every day at a certain point. The point is not to judge yourself, but to identify when are you like an animal, clouded by ignorance of many types. Maybe there's certain times of day when your mindfulness is very well trained, and other times of day when you allow it to slip. And when am I somewhere between a human being and an animal? When am I a hungry ghost? When am I full of addictions? When there's an attachment, and then that attachment grows, and then it takes over my whole mind, and I become blinded by what I'm attached to, so nothing else even occurs to me. Are there certain activities that bring this out? Certain people or conditions? Or certain times in my life when this was dominant? But see if you can find your own addict. Even if your addictive behavior was something socially acceptable, look for that tendency within yourself that becomes miserly and hoards. That wants more and more and more. Can be very obsessive. It's like you have the drives of an animal, but the intelligence of a human. And so you become very strategic and smart about getting more and more and more and more. Or clinging to what you have. Paranoid even. And then within this human life, when I've been full of anger that's turned into hatred, how easy is it to shift out of in the middle of boiling mad or freezing angry? So just remember when you've had heightened anger that's turned into hatred, in the middle of that space, how easy is it to remember any kind of kindness towards anyone, let alone the person you're angry at? Try and feel the way hatred blinds us. You could be angry at one person and a second person tries to speak to you and you have no issues with them, but you yell at them also or freeze them out also. Just try and find that tendency within yourself. Really clarify what it's like, even if it doesn't happen very often. Try to know it. Let the faults of it reveal themselves to you. And those rare moments when you do have hatred, is your tendency more to ice or to fire? Do you shut down, quiet down, block people out? Or do you tear them apart? What style is your hatred? Just know it so you can catch it. Try to remember. And so think, I have been in all 6 realms metaphorically countless times. It's very possible I've been in all 6 realms literally many times. But even though I've been in these different states, it doesn't mean that they are me or that they are permanent. These are tendencies I fall into born from ignorance. Ignorance can be removed with wisdom. I am not ignorance or the afflictions and suffering that come from it. My mind is empty of inherent existence, which means it's able to be transformed. My true nature is this potential. And my rational responses to these various forms or realms show me that I already have begun. May I continue. May I become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. Okay. So it can be very useful to explore each of these tendencies because I think it's natural for us to be able to catch some of our habits and not others. You know, if someone were to say, let me tell you all of your faults, and they had a list with a clipboard, you would, some of them say, oh yeah, I do that. Yep, that's true. Yep, good point. And some of them you'd say, I don't do that. That's not me at all. What do you mean? Because we're blind to them. And those traits that we're blind to are often the ones we're the most defensive about if someone calls us on them, or the ones we're most ashamed about and hide from ourselves. So if instead of doing that whole dance, you consciously say, okay, when am I like this? Not, am I like this? Or is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. You are. Let's go there. Yeah, find it, name it, then you can catch it. You know, and the whole thing in Buddhism is that you are not identifying with your negative states of mind or with your tendency towards these realms. You're seeing it as a completely natural situation born from the innate ignorance that all of us have. So being able to say, oh my gosh, I have jealousy, shouldn't freak us out. It should be just inevitable. Like, well, of course I do. So does everyone. What does mine look like? What does mine do to my experience? And how can I uproot mine using wisdom? Not self-punishment, not self-judgment, not guilt and shame and all that mess. Just by seeing how it doesn't help and seeing that it came from a mistaken way of thinking, it starts to lose energy. But if you don't start with the step of what is it like for me as an individual personally, if we don't take the Dharma personally, then it just stays as kind of interesting ideas that some of which, you know, touch us and some of it never does. Yeah, and you can get people that are very well educated about the Dharma, but never really get it. Yeah, because they don't make it personal. So what did you think when we did these reflections using the 6 realms as kind of our examination point? Did you have any interesting thoughts or questions? Could you see a rational version and a non-rational version, or an afflicted version and a non-afflicted version in response to the environment with, you know, particularly like the God and the demigod realm? Could you see that your response to pleasure and happiness was sometimes really lovely and really open and sharing, and then sometimes the exact opposite, wanting to hoard it and keep it and block people out and feel entitled? Because if you can kind of see your 2 different ways of responding, then you have much more ownership over, why don't I choose the one that's helpful? Right? Rather than just this autopilot way we have of, oh, things are relaxed, oh, phew, I can just kind of ease into it and I can lose my mindfulness because nothing's wrong. Because sometimes that's what happens when we have a lot of pleasure or a lot of material comforts, is that we relax our mindfulness because nothing's wrong. And we're nice enough people that we can get away with it. Do you know what I mean? We can kind of get away with not being mindful all the time because we're relatively nice people. Yeah, and then we lose the habit of it. Yeah, Nisan is saying that I could feel all the realms, yeah, but not full blast. Sometimes you can do one at a time. Yeah, sorry. Oh, Betty, yeah.
Um, I found difficulty to feel the situations that you were trying to take us towards, like extreme generosity or even extreme state of happiness, you know, that like overflow with, with and radiating and wanting. And at the same time, I had a hard time feeling the opposites, like rage and anger. I felt that I identify myself with mixed. I mean, those feelings are mixed. Even sometimes they walk parallel, sometimes they're very dependent on what I think. I think that it depends on the situation. If there is a nice person or a great, I mean, it all very dominate dominated by the situation that makes me react to it. But
The
I
extremes
had
were
to
hard to touch.
separate I'm sorry?
The extremes were kind of hard to touch.
Extremes were kind of hard to touch.
Yeah. I couldn't remember such extreme situations, but I could more identify with things that you were not talking about, and it's fear, pain, you know, which did not bring to rage or anger, just a situation of pain and fear from the state that I was at, and sometimes I am still in pain, that makes me very disturbed by the pain of what I think is a situation that comes from reality, from phenomenon and things like that. So that's what I have to say. That was my experience during the meditation.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
I
Thanks
think
for sharing. I think
to remember that in an analytical meditation is you don't actually have to have the identical experience as what the meditation facilitator is describing. It's more like an invitation to examine, yeah, or an invitation to look at a structure that then you can take home and make your own. So the reason I describe the extremes is that sometimes those are easier to identify than the subtle forms. And if you can identify the extremes, then you can see the subtle forms in an ordinary day. Because in an ordinary day, it's not like you're going from like insane desire, obsession to boiling rage to, you know, we're not teenagers anymore, right? Like maybe when we were 14, that was the case, but now we're grown-ups and life's not that dramatic, you know, you just do, relatively happy, little bit grumpy, relatively happy, little bit grumpy, right? Like we're not like having these like extreme emotions all the time, you know? So the reason that I bring the extreme example is that if you can sort of touch the times when your memory has caught hold of an event, when your memory catches hold of an event, it's usually when it's been extremely pleasurable or extremely painful. Yeah, the things we remember. We don't remember most of our ordinary days, you know? They just kind of blur by as kind of a vagueness, but we remember the days of extreme happiness and extreme pain. And if we can think about, there are times when I've had really extreme happiness and I've responded to that happiness in a way that I feel good about. And then there's been times I've responded to my own happiness in a way I'm a little bit embarrassed about. Yeah, there's times I've wanted to share my happiness. There's times I've wanted to hoard my happiness. Then, you know, alternatively, there's been times I've been in terrible pain, terrible grief, terrible fear, whatever, and I've responded to it in a way that was courageous, that wasn't indulgent, that wasn't self-centered. And I'm so happy to know I have that skill set. And there's times I've had horrible grief and pain, etc. And I've completely gotten lost in it and become completely self-centered and hurt people around me and been totally unskillful with my speech, right? And so what we're trying to do is to remember that the environment or the realm that we're in isn't the substantial cause of our response or our experience, but it seems to be unless we pull back and kind of become objective about it. So you can use whatever sort of like peak experiences in your life you like, or even just kind of like with your imagination, think about what it would be like, even if you don't have a memory that pops into your head. And just kind of ask yourself, what are the ways I can consciously shift from irrational, afflicted, self-centered into compassionate, altruistic, heart expanded? Because I have both tendencies. All of us have both tendencies, right? And it's like right now, we just respond without thinking. We go from feeling to craving, even though there's a window in between. We go straight from what I feel to what I'm doing about it and what I need from it. And it's all very knee-jerk and thoughtless. And it doesn't have to be. And if you can remind yourself that even before you met any kind of dharma, you still had the ability to choose sometimes. Yeah, to choose the better way. You know, to be bigger than your emotions, to be bigger than your situation, to be bigger than self-centeredness. You've already done that in your life. You have that skill set already. It's just something that needs to first be identified, you know, and then expanded. Yeah. So even if it only happens every now and then that you respond well to a situation, which I'm guessing it happens a lot, actually, you're all nice people. But, you know, even if you can find it only 1 or 2 times when it's been hard and yet you dealt with it well, or it's been wonderful and you still wanted to share it, if you can just touch those, then those are expansion points. Yeah, those are points you can build from. Those are building blocks. And it also can help your confidence. Yeah, it can help your confidence realizing that, all right, for better or for worse, I respond in a million different ways to things, but there have been times when my response has been something I'm proud of, something that I really feel like, yeah, that's the way I want to live. And then there's all those other times that is not how I want to live, but it shows me that what's possible. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So use whatever examples resonate. It doesn't really, you know, the content or the invitation isn't really the main thing. The main thing is to kind of use each of these ideas as a pivot point for self-examination. Yeah, so you go, okay, God realm's about pride. Let's look at pride in me. Demigod realm's about jealousy. What is jealousy like in me? You know, like this. And how does the external environment influence me for better or for worse? And how can I adjust that? You know, what are the things that come before my response that have led to a good response? You know, what kind of states of mind, what kind of physical comfort, what kind of whatever? What can I do to give myself a better chance of responding well? Yeah, because also if you remember that when we've responded selfishly, when we've responded with self-cherishing, when we've believed our ignorance, we actually are less happy, right? Like, never mind, we hurt people more, it's less skillful, we create negative karma, blah, 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 samsara. But in that moment of the selfish mind saying, you need to look after yourself now, you first, that very you first, me first mind suffocates your happiness. Yeah? So self-cherishing is lying to us all the time. It's saying, I'll protect you, I'll save you, I'll give you happiness. Once you're happy, then maybe you'll share. But first you, pat, pat, pat. But actually, if you think, for all sentient beings, your heart is wide open and shining full of happiness. Yeah. Not when you're like trying to manipulate people to get them happy, right? Not when you're being a fixer, not when you're up in people's business and trying to like solve problems in a kind of neurotic way, not that. It's a mental attitude of expanded heart. Yeah. So, you know, I was thinking the other day when the neighbors were being noisy and the dogs were barking and there was just like everyone is home all day and we're, you know, making noise. And, you know, I was feeling a little bit like, I'm having trouble concentrating on this important thing I want to be doing. Won't they all just shut up? Right, I was having one of those. And then I thought, what if I include them into my heart before I try to focus, right? Why don't I just take a moment and think, oh yeah, those people having the barbecue, those people with the kids playing, those dogs that are being crazy, that guy mowing the lawn, you know, and just like, why don't I just take a minute and mentally send them some affection? Yeah. I don't have to leave my house and say hi to all of them, just mentally. Why don't I, one by one, send those different areas of noise some affection? Then suddenly I felt like I was in a neighborhood, in a community, surrounded by my friends, and the noise didn't bother me anymore. Right? I could have just put in earplugs, right? I could have put in earplugs and just blocked out the noise. That can work too, and some days that's all we can do. But when you're doing a like, I need to just block everything out, you're actually making your life narrow and small. And when your life becomes narrow like this, you become very isolated and you feel very alone, and you can start to get a bit paranoid or a bit irritable or annoyed easily. You become fragile when your world is small. When your world is big, you're a lot more flexible. Yeah, You're a lot more flexible, and people don't bug you anymore. You actually enjoy people, even if they're being annoying. You know, you kind of enjoy kind of the whole richness of life. Do you know what I mean, right? The two different ways we can respond.
It can also be like very scary with the whole coronavirus issue to disconnect yourself from the community. You have to think about how to keep your compassion alive without actually seeing people.
Yeah,
I think that's a great way to do that.
absolutely. Yeah. And you know, it was funny because I thought my neighbor and I were going to go for a walk the other day, and so we were texting each other, and then we met outside my door like 6 feet away. And you know, normally we would have a big hug, and we were like, nope, 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 don't hug, don't hug, don't hug, and we were like waving from 6 feet away, and then we're walking on like opposite sides of the road as if we were having a fight, you know. And it was absurd, right? It just looked absurd. And yet, you know, we both know that both of us have some health problems, and we're both a bit vulnerable, and we need to be that far away from each other. And in fact, we're probably being a little bit naughty going out for a walk anyway, but we need sunshine and, you know, middle way. And, you know, and I was thinking after the walk, I felt so happy to have had another human, right? Like, you know, there's lots of humans on my computer screen, and I'm connected to you guys because it's live, and that's so nice, and we know each other. But, you know, I was thinking, oh, wow, it's been weeks since I've actually talked to another human in real space. Isn't that lovely? I must make a point to do that more often. And so then yesterday I sat outside my door eating my lunch, and my neighbors were coming in and out, and I just smiled and waved at them, and they smiled and waved at me, and it was enough. It was enough. That was it. It was just, you know, we just smiled and waved at each other. Hey, hey, done. Right? And it was actually really lovely. And to remember that connection is such a huge piece of happiness, but part of what makes us feel disconnected is the illusions of our mind. So actually now, you know, you can spend a whole day by yourself not seeing anyone, but if you're consciously reaching from the heart out to all the different people, you were connected to them anyway, but they were agitating factors. If you're consciously sending affection to them, now they're supportive factors. Yeah, so some strategies are about building connections, some strategies are about revealing connections. Right? But connections is a huge piece of just immediate happiness. But it's not like there aren't connections anyway. It's just we're not using them in a skillful way, and then they feel intrusive or invasive or something. Yeah, or we get that paranoia. So just thinking of ways to either reveal connections or to create connections. This is how we can kind of have immediate real-time happiness just in our little samsaric life. And to realize that a little bit of samsaric happiness or a lot of samsaric happiness is a huge necessity for us as beginners. We can't immediately say, I will have no samsaric happiness. I will only have pure happiness from now on because I am a spiritual practitioner. No, we can't do that. We're babies, right? We're only little, right? We're only little. So, you know, like wave at your neighbors. It's nice. Like, wave at your neighbors. Slowly, slowly, okay? So that's the 6 realms, and the small inner ring that's like half white and half black is just showing how we're continuously cycling through the 6 realms. So it's to try and stop us from thinking that samsara or reincarnation is like a linear evolution. Like, now I'm a human, next life I'll be a demigod, next life I'll be a god, then I'll be a Buddha. No, it's not like that, right? You could be a god and then hell realm, right? And all different ways. So you're always going high to low, all which way. So in Buddhism, we are not having a nice, tidy, linear evolution, not at all. You could have a very good human life and wind up a cockroach the next time. Or you could be a cockroach and die with a positive state of mind and wind up a human. Yep. So remember that with that circle. And then the little core circle, that's the pigeon and the snake and the pig. That's like the battery, right? It's like the battery of samsara, right? Or like the fuel source of samsara: anger, attachment, and ignorance. Anger, attachment, and ignorance is what keeps the whole wheel going. So we'll unpack that a little bit, but we'll have just a little cup of tea and come back in 15 minutes and have our last session. Is that okay? Yep, it'll be more karma and then finito. 15 minutes. See you in a sec.